The day before my 38th birthday, I was diagnosed with a craniopharyngioma brain tumor, and I was going to have brain surgery. This is part 4 of that story. And I'm not a medical professional. This is just my story and how I remember it. Thursday morning, I went in for surgery. Once I was put to sleep, I was out. I don't remember anything, which is good. I don't think I want to remember what happened during the surgery. But eventually it was over and I started to wake up. I don't know how long I was out for, but once I started to wake up, everything was very loud and very bright, and I was being jostled all over the place. And I did not feel good at all. I wasn't in any pain, but I definitely felt sick, very pukey. I tried to throw up over and over again. During all of this, I heard them say I was going to have a CT scan. They wanted to check to see where the tumor had been, to make sure there wasn't any bleeding or anything else going on, and also to see if there were any tools left behind. And because of my pre-surgery CT scan, I knew Monty was most likely there. And despite being rolled around all over the place and all of the throwing up, I remembered that I wanted to say hello, so I hope I did. But they shoved me in the machine, and somehow I managed to stay still enough for the test to complete. And then they started rolling me all around again, taking me to the ICU. On the way there, I heard one of the nurses say that I was retching. I remember thinking, wow, that doesn't sound very professional at all. But retching really is its own thing. Rhythmically alternating about once per second, elevation and descension of the entire, really complicated word I'm not even going to try to pronounce, apparatus in synchrony with the movement of the diaphragm. Well, whatever I was doing, all of the doctors were there, and the neurosurgeon held the bucket to catch all of the retch juice. I thought it was kind of odd that he'd be the one holding it, but I also thought it was kind of nice. After things settled down a little bit, the doctors started asking me some questions. They wanted to do a quick check to see how things were working and if I was aware of what was going on. Eric and Christy were here for this part, and both of them told me later that I did a really good job of answering all of the questions. I don't remember anything specific about it, but I do remember thinking about giving them a wrong answer on purpose, but I thought that's probably not a good idea. Brain surgery is serious business, and they just needed to know that I was okay. Finally, I had some peace and quiet and was able to rest. At some point, Eric's parents came for a visit. I could hear their voices, but I couldn't see them. And then later in the evening, Eric went home, and Christy was going to stay for the night. We had already discussed that this would be a good idea, so he could let the kids know how I was doing and give my mom an update too. Plus, I think it was good for him to get out of there for a little bit to decompress and hopefully get some good sleep. The ICU was pretty fancy. It had a fold-out couch, so visitors could actually spend the night if they wanted to. They also offered pillows and blankets, but Christy was smart and brought her own from home, just in case. But not that she was going to get much sleep that night, because it seemed like every 5 or 10 minutes something would beep or an alarm would go off. And then Norm, who was the nurse in the ICU that night, would have to come in and check things and change things and reset things and get everything back on track. This happened over and over all night long. And each time, I'd look over and I'd see Christy's eyes peeping over the edge of the bed. She later told me that during one of these times we had a short conversation, and I told her that I could see again. It made her happy because she realized then that I was going to be okay. Friday morning, I could feel somebody holding my hands and talking to me. It took a while for me to figure out what was going on, but I realized it was Eric. And when I opened my eyes, I could see that it was Eric. My vision was back, and I could see his smiling face. I was so overwhelmed with love at that very moment. I thought I might start crying, but I probably just fell back asleep. Later that day, I was woken up by somebody who was rolling me around all over the place, and they said they were taking care of my catheter. I didn't even know I had one, but I think they were taking it out. And I just hoped whatever they were doing wasn't being transmitted all over the internet. Soon after, somebody else came into the room. I don't know if she was a nurse or a doctor or what she was, but she said she was going to look at the incision and take out the drainage tube. And I was like, take out what? What are you going to do? So she got out all her tools and started digging around. She took off all the gauze and packing and said everything looked pretty good. And then she started working on the drainage tube. I hadn't looked in a mirror, so I had no idea that I had a tube that was going across my forehead and draining into a little bag sitting on my shoulder. How gross is that? While she pulled it out, it didn't hurt, but it certainly felt weird. And I felt way better once it was out. She took out the oxygen tube thing too. I had only then just started to recover from the whole drainage tube ordeal when someone new woke me up and told me I had to have physical therapy. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. So they told me I had to go and sit in that chair for 30 minutes. And I was like, oh, okay, that's no big deal. Until I was sitting in that chair. And all I wanted to do was lay back down. But while I was sitting in that chair, I ate some applesauce. And not only was that applesauce delicious, but eating it counted towards my 30 minutes of physical therapy. Which was good, because all of this extreme chair sitting was really taking its toll, and I was starting to struggle. After a short recovery from the physical therapy, I was woken up yet again by somebody else who was saying I needed to leave the ICU and transfer to my new room on the neuroscience floor. But before I did this, I needed to go to the bathroom. I didn't have that catheter anymore, but I didn't think I could actually make it all the way into the bathroom to use the toilet there. So they said I could use a commode chair, which sounded pretty fancy at the time. But when I saw it, I laughed and laughed and laughed. It looked homemade. And I spent a good 20 minutes or more trying to draw a picture of it for this video, but I just couldn't. So here's a photograph instead. It's a PVC pipe chair with a toilet seat and a bucket underneath. Simple, yet totally functional design. And then they loaded me up into this fancy chair with wheels. It wasn't really a wheelchair because it kind of glided more so than rolled. And the trip from the ICU to the neuroscience floor reminded me of when I had my babies and they transfer you from your delivery room to your recovery room. But that felt more like a parade, because when you have a baby wrapped up like a burrito in your arms, everybody smiles and waves. But I don't remember any smiles or waves this time around. I did take this opportunity to let them know I was totally over having these puffer things on my legs. Every several minutes, they would tighten up, kind of like a blood pressure cuff, to help with circulation, but they also constantly woke me up. So we did some negotiating, and they said that as long as I got into that chair for 30 minutes, a couple times a day, they could take the puffers off. And I agreed to that, and felt that that was a pretty big win in regards to my recovery. In my new room, they told me I could look in the mirror. Hadn't yet, so I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't look great, but I didn't look terrible either. And I remember thinking, wow, my skin looks pretty good. But that assessment could have been misguided by all of the painkillers I was on at the moment. As the day progressed, the activity slowed down, and Eric sat with me. He couldn't watch TV because having the TV and all that noise was just too much for me. So he just sat there with me and was very patient until it was time to go to sleep for the night. I was sleeping pretty peacefully with only a few beeps and alarms going off every once in a while, when all of a sudden I woke up and out of nowhere I was so incredibly thirsty. I reached for the pitcher of water next to the bed and quickly drank 3 huge glasses of water. I knew while I was doing it that it was probably not a good idea, but it was like I had no control over it at all. And then I started to feel really sick, and the nurse came in, and I started to throw up over and over again. I was not retching this time. This was 100% barfing. The nurse did what he could to get me cleaned up and stable again. But every time, just as I started to fall asleep, the whole thing would start happening again. It seemed like every 2 hours, until about 4 or 5 maybe, when the nurse put something in the IV. I don't know what it was and why he didn't give it to me sooner, but I instantly started to feel better. It was hard to believe that I was originally supposed to be racing in the World Championships later that day. But instead, I was recovering from an all-night barf fest, brought on by the excitement of sitting in a chair for 30 minutes. Or maybe it was the applesauce.